Hello, and welcome to this, our 116th live stream. Anachronistic questions brought direct to you. This is, of course, a reference to our last Monday video, which has to do with anachronisms in the Bible and other literature as well. And if you're interested, please go back and watch that video after tonight's live stream. So, anyway, this is our Friday live stream where we come to you and we answer your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And the rules are the same as always, which is, first of all, super chats have priority. Second, If it's a non-super chat, and we do take non-super chats, we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question so that I know it's directed to me. And if it has to do with something in the Bible or a word in ancient language, I ask that you please give me some context. So in the case of a verse in the Bible, we ask that you include the book, chapter, and verse. And for an ancient language, tell me what language you think it's in and what you think it means. Just so I don't scramble around trying to figure out what you're talking about, okay? So, we also want to say, too, that we're getting really close here to 10,000 subscribers. Really, really close. We're like 30 away. So, next live stream, we'll be celebrating probably 10,000 subscribers at that point. So, this is going to be very, very cool and just a incredibly... we're humbled by this milestone. We never expected to get this far, this fast, this soon. It's kind of taken us a bit flat-footed, because we were really expecting that this would never materialize. But we planned for failure, not success. So the fact that we're now hitting 10,000 subscribers is just... Dr. Falk has a knack for answering anachronistic questions. Well, okay. Francis Dobbs, 10,000 today, 1,000,000 tomorrow. Wow. Didn't it take 3 years? That's like forever. Actually, to be honest, that's super fast for a YouTube channel. One of the things about YouTube channels that, I mean, I've been learning a whole lot about YouTube channels ever since joining YouTube that I never knew. And only 1% of YouTube channels ever make it to 10,000. So it's like something like 1.4%. It's really a small number of YouTube channels that ever make it to 10,000 subs. The other thing is that just to make to 1,000 subs, the average is like 9 years. It's like an incredibly long time to make it just to 1,000. So to make it to 10,000 in 3 years, that's really fast. I mean, that's head-spinning fast. So, what can I say? We never expected to make it that far. So, anyway. Well, I mean, we got our first 1,000 subscribers in 13 months. That's how long it took us to get our first... I mean, but that's really faster than normal. But anyway, all of this is thanks to just the most incredible community that we have here. We have just an incredible community that just supports this channel. And we are so grateful to the community. So, we want to thank everyone who's been supporting this channel. It's been just a great ride. We really, really appreciate the support. And just the wonderful community here that just supports each other and just is, just so helpful. And not just to me, but to everyone else here too. So anyway, we're going to be celebrating 10,000 next week, and we hope you join us for that. So anyway, let's get into the questions. And we're going to start the night here with 3 non-super chats, and then, oops, 2, yes. What, somebody is not doing the questions without a Q&A? Oh, I already did that. I already went over the rules. Okay. So, let's get to the questions. Our first non-super chat tonight is from Darkblade. And he asks, why did the population of Canaan fall drastically from 1550 to 1220 BC? How is the sun spike back up consistent with Israel being called the smallest nation in Deuteronomy 7:7? Great question. We do know that during, say, the Amarna period, that there was an incredible decline in population. Now, this actually comes off of the demographics of Canaan has kind of a, how do I say this? An up and down effect. Now, during the Middle Bronze period, the early Middle Bronze period, the population of Canaan sort of hit a high. It was a very productive land. It had a lot of rainfall, and the population swung up. Then, during what we would call the end of the Middle Bronze Age, early, late Bronze, say 1, the population takes a dive. It takes an extreme nosedive. We don't exactly know the reason why that happened. There's some speculation that there was a drought and that they couldn't maintain crops. So the states sort of contracted from basically land holdings to basically city-states. So where the individual cities could defend their walls, but really not the lands beyond that. So we don't know why there wasn't exactly why there was a population decrease, but there was. Some have speculated that there might have been a drop in fertility. We do know, for example, that say the patriarchs struggled with fertility, as we know from the story of Abraham and Sarah. So it's possible that the Canaanites, as a sojourning nation with maybe a inadequate nutritional supply, may have undergone a reduction in fertility that led to a decrease in population. However, we do know from the Amarna letters that essentially these cities were undermanned and did not have enough people to defend their walls. We have actually military requests in the Amarna letters that basically go from, say, 250 to 50 men. You know, basically these various kings are asking, say, the king of Egypt, hey, if you can just send 50 men, we can turn the tide of war. 50 men? That's not very much. But at the same time, too, this sort of makes sense of, say, Abraham's 314 trained men. So if the number of soldiers that are involved at the end of, say, the Middle Bronze Age is that small, then, okay, we can sort of gear this towards, well, what's the population density of the area as a whole? So we don't know why the population of Canaan fell so drastically, but we know it did. Now, on the other hand, say once you get to the late Bronze, say late Bronze 2, basically the fertility of the land seems to have returned, but now you've got several groups trying to infiltrate the land. So you have that sudden spike up of the Canaanites, but now the Canaanites are under pressure by both the Philistines and the Israelites. So now you've got a bountiful land at basically the late Bronze 2, early Iron Age 1, that's being now fought over for its fertility. So it does seem to be something to do with the fertility of the land. We're just not exactly sure what. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. What happened? Okay, then I'll ignore his next question. Okay. All right, our next super chat here next question here was from Bonbon. When we look at the sculptures of the ancient Near East of extremely fat women, and some interpret this as saying that obesity was desired, How are these women able to become fat? Were the scriptures exaggerating? Okay. The question is no, they weren't exaggerating. We do actually have records from ancient Egypt, particularly at the site of Deir Bakri, and also from the Chapel del Rouge, basically a bark chapel of Hatshepsut, where it talks about the Queen of Punt being this extraordinarily beautiful woman, and they show relief of her being quite rotund. Now, there's also a description in a text of basically the women of Africa being women of girth, and also being described as extremely beautiful. Now, how these women became so large seems to be a matter of diet. We are told for example, in the papyri about the women of Africa, that they achieve this through a diet of primarily milk and millet. So they're eating mostly carbs. Lots of carbs, lots of milk products. So it's really a carb-rich diet that causes them to attain this beauty. So it's not exaggerating, and it is absolutely true that in this culture of knife-edge agriculture, very, very few people were able to basically put on weight in that way, just because the supply of carbohydrates was very limited. So essentially, that's what they did. They had a dedicated diet, a specific diet that allowed them to achieve obesity. So it's not an exaggeration, and it is true that this was a very, very desired look. And again, it's unusual. It's a sign of affluence and wealth. You're not starving to death. You've got the money to basically, well, I mean, like today, women today, they pour a lot of money into their looks. Some will go get plastic surgery. Some will buy $10,000 in cosmetics. Some will go to spas and beauty salons. It's no different than back then. Only back then, you poured it into milk and millet. So it's very, very much that that they had the wealth to obtain that beauty. So anyway, it's not exaggeration. It's well documented, and it's just a historical fact. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. All right, the third question here is from Darkblade. And he goes, Papyrus Anastasi 6 and Numbers 2014 both mention the country of Edom, existing in the 13th century BC. Correct. Is this evidence for the reliability and authenticity of this early part of the Old Testament? That's a different question, but it is probably authenticating it. Now, it is true that the archaeology of, say, the cities of Edom that archaeologists tend to focus on tend to date to the 10th century. But we also can't ignore the fact, too, that Egyptian papyri of the 13th and 12th century also mention Edom. So we've got here a sort of a little tension between the documentary record and the archaeological record. And of course, a lot of archaeologists tend to be biblical archaeologists, so they're basically looking at their findings and going, well, our archaeology doesn't agree with the Bible, so the Bible's wrong. While ignoring, say, Papyrus Anastasi 6. So, anyway, I think this is actually pretty good evidence that at the time of, say, the Exodus, there would have been people would have known about the nation of Edom, even if, say, the capital cities and, say, some of the archaeological sites date to a later period. And that's just sort of what we would expect for any nation anyway. I mean, not every nation has every city up when it's founded. You know, cities become founded over time. So it strikes me that Numbers 20 here is being consistent with what we find in Papyrus Anastasia 6. So absolutely, it does seem to confirm the reliability and, say, the authenticity of this early part of the Old Testament. So I don't think there's any need to say that this is anachronism. There's just no need for it, because we find it in Egyptian records. So, you know, what more can you say than that? You know, these records from Egypt are datable and can be authenticated. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat, or sorry, the question. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. All right, now we're on to the super chats. Our first super chat here is for $10. Thank you very much, from 501 Mobius. It's good to see you here tonight. Okay. He asks, when did people start building cisterns to store water? I know at some time they were plastered to better save water. Oh, wow. Actually, the cistern is very, very early in Levantine history. It goes all the way back to the Neolithic period. So long before, say, I mean, you have some really early cities like, say, Jericho. So around the time they're building Jericho, they're already building the first cisterns. And Jericho goes back to something like 10,000, 8,000 BC. I mean, it's a 10,000-year-old city. So it's really an early process. The Neolithic period, I mean, you're talking 8,000 BC. So that's when you're starting to see the first cisterns being built. And already plaster is being used on these. There's actually a fragment of a plaster floor from Israel. And if memory serves me right, it's something like 12,000 BC. So they already had plaster technology in the Neolithic period. So cistern technology is really, really old. Much before, say, most of the cities of the Levant were even founded. So, it's extremely old. And the reason they plastered was to help retain water. That you could create a waterproof layer with the plaster. So that prevented, say, water from seeping through the cracks in these caves. Now, for those who don't know what a cistern is just a giant cave that was used to collect rainwater to store it for later use. Kind of a nasty way to store water, but, is better than dehydration. So people did this. So anyway, it's a very old practice. Definitely Neolithic. It's definitely Neolithic. So it's pre-Bronze Age. This is pre-Bronze Age technology. So it's pretty incredible that before the Bronze Age that they were making these water storage things. And some of these cisterns are huge. Like the one at Masada can contain 2 million gallons. Just they're incredibly large. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped, and I hope that answered your question. So thank you very much. The next super chat here is from the Camillapard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks a question on eschatology. On Judgment Day, will those who were in heaven after death be judged, or just those who were in Hades after death? This is a question of procedure. When does the judgment take place? Okay. Now, in some ways, there's two judgments. There's two judgments. There's the judgment of the righteous and what's sometimes called the Great White Throne Judgment. Now, the judgment of the righteous is sort of an ongoing process. It's when people sort of get their new bodies and they basically start getting their rewards. Basically, early judgment of the righteous things you did. Now, anyone who's in heaven is presumed to have basically been among the righteous. So those in heaven after death will be judged for their good works. Okay? But those who did not go to heaven directly would have been sort of remanded in custody in Hades as a holding cell. Those people don't face judgment until, say, the Great White Throne Judgment. So the judgment is going to depend upon which side of the amnesty you're on. Were you on the side of the amnesty that said, okay, God, I agree with you that sin is bad and, I repent? Or are you on the side of the amnesty that says, I love sin and I don't want anything to do with you, God? So that's going to depend where you are physically in the afterlife. If you're on that sin against God, you're going to be in Hades. If you're God against sin, you're going to be in heaven. And that's going to color what judgment you face and when you face it. So this is one of those it depends questions. And it's going to be one of those that it depends upon where you are situational to God's amnesty. So it could be either case depending on where you are in terms of salvation. So anyway, I know that answer was a little meandering, but it really does sort of depend on where you are salvifically. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And it's an interesting question, but it really does depend where you are in terms of your basically relationship with Jesus Christ. So thank you for the question and the super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay, the third super chat here is from Aston Weir from 199. Thoughts on Alyssa Childers? Okay. Oh boy. Oh boy. All right. Here's a question that could get me in a lot of trouble. Alyssa Childers is she's an apologist, but she is also, how do I say this? She became an apologist because she was a singer and an entertainer. Okay? She completed high school, but she has no academic training. She doesn't have a PhD. She doesn't have a master's degree. She doesn't even have a bachelor's degree. She was an entertainer. She was a musician. And she was, I forget the name of it. Was it, I think it was something like Zoe Girl was the name of the band she was in. She's not very good at what she does, okay? I know she really focuses a lot on, say, progressive Christianity, the ethics of, say, abortion and critical race theory and all that. When she gets into archaeology, it's just she drank the Associates for Biblical Research Kool-Aid, okay? She's had on her channel several times guests such as Scott Stripling, Jeremiah Johnson. She's really an ABR shill when it comes to the archaeology. Not towards anything else, but when it comes to biblical archaeology, she just goes right to ABR, and that's just the end of the matter. So, I don't care for her. I don't care for her apologetics. I don't care for her apologetics. As I said, the ABR connection is very deeply problematic. She was one of the first to come out on an interview, say, Johnson and Stripling on the Mount Ebal inscription. Okay? So, it's just, once you sort of commit to that, what's she going to say at this point? Oops. Yeah, you're not going to get an oops out of her. Okay? So, it would have been nice if she sort of held off on that sort of thing until, the situation became more clear. But she doesn't know enough to critically evaluate archaeological discoveries. So, yeah, it can. Some of her interviews can be very deeply problematic. But anyway, again, she's a popular apologist. No formal training in the field. No formal education. And there's times when that really sort of shows. But because of her connection to the entertainment industry, particularly the Christian entertainment industry, she's got connections, and she's been able to secure quite a following because of her connection as a musician. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped, and I appreciate the support. Just saw a comment here from Eddie P. Her view of Christian orthodoxy is too narrow. I'd probably agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Ooh. In Gaponi's Conrafi, Mount Ebal became a quick evaluation point on how serious some people are. Yikes. Oh boy. Yeah, it was really, as my producer just said, it was really obvious it was published too soon. It also became a shibboleth test. It very much became a shibboleth test. I mean, very, very early on, that whole Mount Ebal amulet thing became, oh, you agree with the epigraphy of the translation committee, or you're an atheist. Oh, gee. Yeah, yeah, you wouldn't disagree with it just because it was wrong. You're disagreeing it because you're an atheist. Yeah. Emphasis. Publish the paper. Yeah. Yeah. As my yeah. My producer points out here that it also becomes a test of wait and see. Responsible scholarship waits. These are supposed to be results that are presented at a conference. They're supposed to be evaluated and weighed by the academic community. Then you publish, and then if it passes all the checks and balances in the peer review, then you announce it. Yeah, it was first interviewed. That's there. Mm-hmm. Get ripped to shred at a conference. You get ripped to shred, then you present it. Well, Jack Ray, I think, hit it on the nail here. Mount Ebal Rorschach test of, quote, how much can you help ABR get more money? That is an uncomfortable truth. Yeah, they made a killing on this thing. Yeah, they made a killing on this thing because they went to the press first, and a lot of people donated to them because they thought ABR was producing results. And when it was just smoke and mirrors. The whole thing was smoke and mirrors. And it's still smoke and mirrors. Somebody else asked a question here. Isn't your stance that that you believe that the Mount Ebal defixio is valid? Valid as a defixio, okay? But that you agree with the original late date rather than the early revised late. Okay, let's nuance this. I think that it's most likely that this is a defixio. I mean, it's a lead amulet. Most lead amulets are defixios. It would be very difficult to disagree with that. It's a defixio. The question is, what does the inscription say? Is this a defixio against Yahweh? Or for Yahweh? Is it a defixio for or against some other god? We don't know. We don't have a good, clear inscription here. And that's the problem. It's one thing to just look at a lead amulet and say, yeah, it's a defixio. You know, that's pretty obvious. But deciphering that defixio is another matter entirely. And if you're going to try to produce the smoking gun that this is the cult site of Yahweh worship, boy, you better have your iotas and taus dotted and t'd and all that, just because there is there's a lot hanging on that claim. So what the problem here is not so much that they claimed it was a defixio. The problem was that they had sort of carved out an inscription and translation that wasn't readily apparent, that you couldn't see. The date's also an issue. I mean, it really is. The fact is that Stripling had hijacked the whole academic process too, to try to show it as an early date. So that is an issue. That's very much an issue of this, because for ABR this is a winner-take-all thing. If ABR can show that the Mount Ebal defixio proves an early Exodus date, that's a winner-take-all thing. If it stands along with the original excavators that this is a late date, then they lose it all. So for them, they have a lot on the line here. Because if the Mount Ebal site does not date to an early Exodus period, then they have no early Exodus date. So they need the early conquest to show an early Exodus date. So, so anyway, thank you very much for the question, and and to Asawir, who stirred the pot. He does what he does best. Oh boy. Linguist. Oh, Adam. But they've already disproved the documentary hypothesis with this defixio laugh. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they made that claim. Such a ridiculous claim. Let me see, is it there? There it is. Asawir, want me to stir it even more? Oh, you're doing just fine, thanks. I think I'm in enough trouble now. I'm sure I'm going to be vilified now on the Alyssa Childers show. Alyssa Childers is great. You should have her on. Yeah, I'm sure that'll go well. All right. Anyway, let's... So let's get to the next super chat here. All right, the next super chat here is from Paul Thompson for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do we know of Solomon's father-in-law in 1 Kings 3:1? Very little, actually. Now, it's most likely that the father-in-law, and he's talking about the Egyptian father-in-law here. In fact, let's pull up the Bible and just read the text quickly here. Where is it now? Okay, there we go. All right. Size that just a little. First Kings 3:1. Then Solomon formed a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David, until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. Okay. So not only do we have the fact that there was an alliance between Solomon and Pharaoh, but we also got a time frame here. So he took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house, which took, I believe, 13 years, and the house of the Lord, which was 11. So this is at the beginning of Solomon's reign, because Solomon begins his the building of the temple in his 4th year. So what happened? Who would have been the king at this time? And the answer would have been Siamun. Now, we know very, very little about Siamun. We don't have any inscriptions for him. We know of him through the king's lists and through Manetho, but there's very little recorded about him. We don't have any inscriptions from Siamun. He is the second to last king of the 21st dynasty. This is a time when the Egyptian monarchy is falling to bits. It's falling to bits. And they're about to lose control to the Libyans. So, this is sort of a time of transition. It's very unusual for Egyptian kings to give their daughters to foreign kings as treaty wives. But in this particular case, it seems to be that the 21st dynasty was in such rough shape that they were looking for allies anywhere they could. So, the only thing we sort of know about Siamun is the whole kingdom is falling apart. It's falling apart. So, anyway, there's not much more we can say. We don't have any inscriptions from Siamun. We don't have any records. We do know how long he reigned, which was he reigned for 19 years. So he had a long reign. And he reigned from between 980 to 961. So there's a really good, strong overlap here with the reign of Solomon. And Solomon reigns from roughly 969 to 930. So this is probably the most likely candidate for the pharaoh that he had an alliance with. But we don't know much about him, in all honesty. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. But again, we just don't have any inscriptions from him. No papyri, nothing from this particular ruler. So, anyway, that's the best we can do on this one. Again, the kingdom's falling apart. He's not making temples or monuments, and we just don't have any records. So, but we can tell, basically, from the chronology who it was. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, the next super chat here is from Zeobeo for €55. Thank you very much for that really generous super chat. Very much appreciated. And he goes, "Hi, Dr. Falk. Where can I learn about the Naditum?" There's actually been a few books published on this. There's actually a fair number of inscriptions about the Naditum priestesses. Can you give an examples other than the very late story of Sargon you mentioned? Yeah, they are actually recorded fairly frequently in Assyrian records. And I think, as I said, there has been one or two PhD dissertations on this. I don't know if they've been turned into popular books, but there's quite a few. Like, for example, if you go into, say, the what's it now, the CAD, the Chicago Assyriology, or the Chicago Akkadian Dictionary. There's actually a large section on the Naditu. It doesn't give you a lot of detail in there, so you'd have to look up each text individually. But there's a lot of text on the Naditu, especially in terms of contracts, their dealings with other people. Like, for example, they'll often be called a Naditum. So, but the story of Sargon is probably the most famous incident of a Naditum breaking their vow. Now, it does seem to be the case that a lot of Naditum who did break their vows ended up adopting their kids out, not just sort of floating them down the river. But that doesn't change the fact that there was this superstition concerning them. And he mentions further, what I find makes it seem that they were all female, and Wiki mentions 2 cases of some having kids and giving up for adoption. That is correct. There are cases of that. Now, we have to understand, and this is probably coming out of the video that I did on, say, Genesis 6. We do have to understand in Genesis 6 there's 2 cults. Not just one. Which is that you have the sons of God, and you have the daughters of men. So it could be very, very likely that the daughters of men, or literally the daughters of Adam, was another kind of priestess cult. So in that case, they would be, if this vow was, say, restricted just to women, it could very easily have been that it was the breaking of the vow by the daughters of Adam. So there is that to consider, as well as the other as well. So anyway, thank you very much for that really generous super chat. We really appreciate it. But there's actually a fair bit of material on this. So, but I hope I know that, as I said, there's been people who've written on this, but I don't, off the top of my head, know of any books I can direct you to directly. But I think there's been some dissertations on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. The next super chat here is also from Zeobeo for €22. Thank you very much for that. Also, that very generous super chat. And he says, I recently viewed a Michael Jackson concert and watched with amusement on how people were crying and fainting in religious ecstasy at his every movement. Did the average ancient Egyptian act the same way around Pharaoh? That is actually a very interesting question. In some cases, yes. Some cases, no. Some of this is going to depend on what period we're talking about. At the height of, say, the Egyptian Empire in the New Kingdom, yeah, it was probably very true. There does seem to have been crowds that came out and greeted the king, and were said to have gotten deeply excited at this. There's even an incident where, say, a pharaoh drops a scepter and it hits some poor guy below, and the guy is just like thinking, "Oh my gosh, he dropped his scepter on me. I'm gonna die. I'm cursed. I'm gonna die." So there was some religious hysteria associated around the king, but it also seems to be true that, say, much earlier kings were treated with, say, less religious reverence. So there does seem to be a change in attitude over time. Like, for example, the kings of the Old Kingdom were just kind of seen like men. I mean, they were just more or less, oh, it's the king. Yeah, here he is. Uh-huh. But later on, I mean, you do get that hysteria, say again in say the New Kingdom, particularly at the end of the New Kingdom, where the kings are elevated to living gods, and you see this after the reign of Amenhotep, or during the reign of Amenhotep III and after, right up until say the end of Dynasty 20, in which case it's just it sort of goes back at that point with, say, the Third Intermediate period to, yeah, he's just a dude. Yeah, just a dude like the rest of us. So it really is going to depend upon who, when, and where. I mean, at all times, the king is going to be viewed as with respect. I mean, he is the monarch. He is the king. Okay, so that people are going to come out and they are going to show adulation to the king. It's just in what way are they going to show adulation? Are they going to show him as a kind of god, or are they going to show him as just a celebrity? You know, they're all kings through the history of Egypt would have had that celebrity status, but some kings more so than others. We do see, for example, in say the Tale of Sinaway, you know, when he appears before Sinaway appears before the king, you know, and they show the splendor of the king in his throne room, in his golden throne on the golden dais, and he has splendor. You know, you're supposed to get that impression. You're supposed to be deeply, deeply impressed by this description. So there is that sort of celebrity status, but you didn't get the impression, you know, even in the Tale of Sinaway, which dates to the Middle Kingdom, that the king was any sort of god. So there wasn't that religious reverence, but more or less, wow, I'm in the presence of someone super cool, super awesome. And it's sort of, that was as far as it sort of went. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Next super chat here is from Fulvinson for 199. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do we know about Anbessa Edom of Abyssinia? And I think he means in 867 AD. It continues the question here. In Crusader Kings 3, Anbessa Edom is Negus king of Abyssinia in 867 AD. He is part of the Solomonid dynasty. However, in 1066, start date Negus Yamarana Krestos of Zagwe dynasty. It would also be cool to know if there's anything about the House of Gideon that is both present in CK3 that starts as Jewish Ethiopian rulers. Okay. I can't answer this question. I'm going to be very, very blunt about this. This has to do... Linguist Ammo, I never thought I'd live to see the day that there would be a CK3 question. Yeah, okay. This is so outside of my area of expertise, it isn't even funny. Okay. You would really need to... I mean, I know Abyssinia is a kingdom that's sort of a crescent-shaped kingdom that stretches from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean. So it's basically going across the northern Arabian Peninsula through Edom and just touches the Mediterranean. But I'm not a medievalist. You need to ask a specialist here on medieval history. I'm not a specialist in medieval history, particularly Islamic medieval history. I couldn't answer this question to save my life. I've never done any study in Islamic medieval history. Thus, I can't answer this question at all. I have not the faintest idea how historistic. No. This is we're on the Abyssinia Abassa of Edom question. 659. is where we are on the timestamp. Okay. So we're answered if you want to live. That is my answer. I don't know. So I don't know. Not a medievalist, not a specialist is in Islamic history, and that's what you need to answer this question. So, sorry, I just don't know everything. So, anyway, I want to thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Late Bronze Age history is really my specialty, and the Late Bronze Age history of Egypt, to be very blunt. So that's where my specialty lies, and that's my wheelhouse. Anything, I mean, I know about, say, Levantine history and ancient Near Eastern history because I've done work in that area. Medieval history, don't know. Just don't know. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, but even my knowledge has limits. Okay. In Japonis Konrafi for $10. Thank you very much for that super chat. Sponsor non-super chat question. By the way, thank you and your producer for doing these live sessions. You might not know it, but they are making a real difference in lives such as mine. Blessings. Well, thank you so much for the kind words. And we appreciate the feedback because, you know, we like to know too, because we don't get a lot of direct feedback from these once they go to, say, you know, recording. So when you tell us, we do get a lot of negative feedback. We get an awful lot of negative feedback. So it's nice to know it's making a difference in some people's lives. We really appreciate knowing that. And we thank you for those kind words. And let's find a nice, juicy question here. I could take the one above there. Oh, we can take his question. Why not? He said sponsor a non-super chat. We can take this one here. Okay. This one non-super chat comes from Japonis Konrafi. It just happens to be one that's close by to his sponsored non-super chat. He says the Bible describes the earth in terms water above the firmament and below. My wife suggested God was perhaps using this to avoid using a modern science view they would not understand. Thoughts? That's not an unreasonable interpretation. To be very honest, it does seem to be very much. It's analogical language. Okay, first of all, we got to say that it's analogical language and it's ancient cosmology. The idea that water's above waters and that the earth was created by separating the waters is paramount to ancient cosmology. It's not meant to reflect scientific reality. It's meant to be an analogy to describe what they couldn't understand directly. So, and there is some idea that they could get this. The idea that, you know, sky is blue, it must be a celestial ocean. Okay? Yeah, perfectly reasonable. Water came down from the sky in rain. Perfectly reasonable. So it was an easy way to say, okay, that there's waters above the firmament. And in a sense, that's correct. You know, for what they're trying to reveal here, which is theological truth, they can use an analogy to help describe that theological truth as using analogical language. Because frankly, the whole idea of using scientific, say, truth to try to describe these things would just be confusing to a Bronze Age culture. You know, so it's just, they have to describe these things in analogical terms. So it makes total sense. So, you know, I think your wife is on the right track. I think she's on the right track. So I hope that didn't cause you any trouble, but at the same time, too, I think she's absolutely right about this. That's because if you start using scientific realities here, you know, you're gonna have to explain water cycles and atmospheric pressure, and you know, these are concepts that are not, it's not in accord with Bronze Age understanding. No, they didn't use terms like barometric pressure. Funny that. Funny they didn't have a barometer to have terms such as barometric pressure.
Over the
They also didn't have the term like hydrological table or hydrosphere, meteorology, evaporation cycle. Funny that. Yeah. Yeah, so they're using analogical language and Bronze Age cosmology, which is a kind of analogy to describe theological truths. So, absolutely, she's on the right track here, and it's good thinking that she's doing it this way, because it gets to the point of what these passages are, which are statements of theology and mytho-history, not a science textbook. Yeah, okay, we say it's not a science textbook when it comes to, say, the creation evolution debate, but it's also not a science textbook when it comes to just things such as rain from the sky. Well, I mean, it is. Yeah, there is an element of truth to it. Okay, there's an element of truth to it, but it's done through analogy. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. And even though you may not have asked me to answer your question, it's a good question and it was worth answering. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and great question. Okay. Need to take a timestamp here. Okay, we got a super chat here from Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, many say sins of historic people are justified by their different context. For example, was it okay for Jonathan Edwards to own slaves because that was his world? Well, it might not have been okay, but it was also reality. Like, for example, one of the things, say, for example, in certain American states, you could inherit slaves, but you weren't free to let them go. It was actually, in some American states, it was actually a crime to let slaves go, to free them. So, in some ways, American slave owners were just as much a victim of the system as, say, the slaves themselves. So, again, it was a reality of the times. Now, this is not to exclude slavery in any sense. In fact, it was a horrible, horrible thing. And it was a sin for people to maintain that idea that slavery was biblical or valid. The thing is that, say, in for example, some of these sins, there's, say, permissive, what they call, say, permissive points of view versus, say, prescriptive. Like, for example, divorce. Divorce is one of those things where, it's never considered to be the ideal. It's never considered to be ideal, but it was permitted because of the hardness of men's hearts. Slavery is very similar in that respect. It was never endorsed, but it was permitted because of the hardness of men's hearts. So, in the case of, say, Jonathan Edwards owning slaves, slavery was still the norm everywhere at that time. It wasn't just for him in North America, but all over the world. Every nation held slaves. Even England held slaves at that point. England was the first country to abolish slavery. But that came relatively late. That was the 19th century. Jonathan Edwards in the 17th century wouldn't have known better. It was part of the system. Now, the Bible has also been very clear on how slaves should have been treated, too. Was it a sin for Jonathan Edwards to keep slaves? Is a question that, theologians are going to debate. But how did he treat those slaves? That's going to be where the rubber meets the road. We do know that there are instances where good slave owners, if there is such a thing, treated their slaves incredibly well. So much so that they became bondservants. They gave up their right to freedom to basically serve their master forever. I'll tell you something. I work in a day job. I mean, yes, okay, you can't compare a day job to slavery. I could quit any time. Really, I can't because I still have to pay the rent. But I wouldn't want to work for my boss forever. That would be just awful. To love a master enough that you would give up your freedom forever? And yet people did this. Slaves voluntarily, after, say, their 7 years of when they paid their debt, gave up their freedom to have, their ear pierced, a gold ring put in the ear, and basically being shown that they are owned forever by their master with no chance of freedom. That shows that there's a real difference here. Now, one of the other things we have to make clear too, that not all slavery was the same. The American slavery was probably some of the most oppressive slavery ever. In the Roman world, slaves were we have one text of a slave who reported directly to Caesar. And he had written this, there was this document, and he wrote about the purchase of a slave for a slave's slave. So this slave to Caesar owned 3 tiers of slaves underneath him. Slavery in the ancient world was really different. Slaves could own to other slaves. They could produce wealth on their own. They could own property. So, it's very, very different than, say, American slavery, American chattel slavery. It's not comparable at all. Not comparable even in the slightest. In fact, there were some Roman slaves that were incredibly well off, incredibly wealthy. They were given a latitude of freedom that even most free people didn't have. Slave, as I said, a slave to Caesar could be an incredibly powerful person who had responsibility and, power that, made even some military men tremble because they had the ear of Caesar himself. So, it was, I mean, it was really it is a huge difference between, say, as I said, the slavery of the old world and, say, slavery of, say, the, North America. So, again, I'm not going to get into the historical debate here, whether or not Jonathan Edwards sinned by having slaves, but it's going to depend on how he treated them, essentially, and what sort of freedoms did he give them, how did he care for them, not just materially, but spiritually, and did he treat them like, human beings made in the image of God? Because, frankly, as I said, in many American states, it was illegal to let slaves go. So if you had inherited a slave from your father, you had no choice but to keep him. So anyway, it's a complex issue. It's complicated, and I don't want to say underplay the severity of the degradation that slaves went through. At the same time, too, it's more complicated than that as well. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay. Let me explain the shepherd. Rumor has it Dr. Falk knows every language. Well, I know a lot of languages, I don't know every one of them. My French is pretty shabby. I'll say that. I remember when I was in Paris once. I tried my French because I grew up in Canada. Part of growing up in Canada is you're taught French in high school. So I decided, okay, I'm going to brush up my French a little, go to Paris and speak a little French. And there was a shop clerk. I went to a wine store, and I started to try to speak French, and the lady goes, "Don't do that. Don't. Stop. Don't do that. We'll speak English. It's fine. Don't speak French." I can only take from that my pronunciation was so bad. It was just great on the Parisian ear. Yeah. Yeah, not good at speaking these languages, not by a long shot. So I can read a lot of languages. I think it was read 14, 15 languages, but speaking them, no, not gonna happen. Okay. Okay, Alexander Mendez for 499. Thank you very much for the super chat. When do you think the 5 books of Moses, as well as the book of Judges, Samuel, and Kings, were written, Dr. Falk? Great question. Now, Kings is definitely post-exilic. We don't even have to debate that because it makes references to their exile. So Kings is definitely post-exilic. Samuel is probably post-exilic as well. Judges is debatable. Now, it's possible that Judges was pre-exilic. Can't be sure about it. It's definitely Iron Age, though. At the very, very minimum, maybe exilic. It's a possibility. The 5 books of Moses is a different matter. Now, I take a kind of supplementary view of the 5 books of Moses. Now, what do we mean by supplementary view? What we mean is when Moses wandered the universe, or sorry, not the universe, the wilderness. He didn't wander the universe. He could have, could be. When he wandered the wilderness, it seems to be that he would write down pages or people, or he had an amanuensis, basically a scribe, record his speeches. So what seems to have happened is when they enter into the promised land, Moses sort of hands the people a stack of papers. And it's more or less up to then the Joshua and his posterity to put those papers into some kind of order. So there does seem to be some editorial smoothing. What we mean by editorial smoothing is basically some scribe has gone through the papers of Moses, put them in order, and then wrote connecting text between them. For example, we see often in like Deuteronomy, Moses said to the people this. We also see at the end of, say, the book of Deuteronomy, the death of Moses, and clearly Moses didn't write that himself. But that whole Moses wrote this, or this is what he said to the people, does seem to be that there is these are collected papers that are basically, aggregated into 5 books, and that some scribe has edited between, put a little bit of sort of introductory text here and there to smooth it out. So it does. We also have historical markers in the Book of Moses that do seem to be very, very early, late Bronze Age, and I wouldn't even say even into the early Iron Age. I mean Bronze Age. We have great, for example, in Exodus, we have an incredibly detailed account of Bronze Age Egyptian geography. This is stuff that wouldn't have been known to people in even, say, Dynasty 21. So, clearly 19th Dynasty geography. So there's some really good evidence here to suggest that all of this, at least the core documents of the Pentateuch, were written, say, in the late Bronze Age. We do have, say, editorial updating, like, for example, for grammar and diction and that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the core documents do seem to have details that are definitely late Bronze Age, and they even have Egyptian vocabulary in it too. So, I think it's very, very clear that the 5 books of Moses have their nuclei in the desert wandering just before the conquest. But the other ones are sort of up for debate. Kings, as I say, is definitely post-exilic. Samuel, probably post-exilic. Judges, could go either way. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and great question. Okay. Mystery Flavor for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsoring on super chat. I also want to take this moment here to also thank Jack Ray. Jack Ray has given us a $50 super chat through PayPal. Thank you very much for the super chat. We really appreciate it. We also want to thank him for sponsoring a bunch of super chats. Was he sponsored 40 super chats tonight? So, or it's not super chats, memberships. Memberships, sorry. 40 memberships. So, if you're here on the live stream tonight, please collect your membership that has been most generously donated by Jack Ray. So we want to thank you very much for that. We really, really appreciate your support of this channel. So, let's see here. I actually saw a great question earlier on. Timestamp here. Go back here. Okay. Here it is. And it's the great question from Casey Jones. And person asks, I was reading Hoffmeyer's Israel in Egypt, and he mentioned the excavations at Charu weren't finished and New Kingdom material hadn't been dug up yet. Have there been any develops on this? Oh yes, absolutely. We have to understand that Israel in Egypt is now, I think it's close. That book is now close to 30 years old. It's very long in the tooth. And Jim is at this point doing a new. He's doing a second edition of that book, where the latest stuff is, where he's updating a lot of it. There's been a lot of discoveries. I think that was published in '96, somewhere around then. So it's an old book, and you can't exactly you can't rely on it for up-to-date information anymore, unfortunately. Since he published that book, there's been a lot of excavations done at Charu. They have found New Kingdom stuff at Charu now. It's very clear now that they found like Tutmosis III stuff. They found some Ramesside stuff. So yeah, they've definitely found New Kingdom material now at Charu. There's no doubt about it now. And they've also found both sides of the fortress. So the thing about the fortress of Charu was it was a two-part fortress. It had one part on one side of the river and one part on the other side, and a bridge that connected them. So they found both sides of the fortress. So it's been absolutely fascinating what they have found at Charu. And they have definitely found New Kingdom stuff there. And they've even found some Third Intermediate stuff there, too. So yeah, they have. They call it Tel Hebua A and Tel Hebua B. So they have definitely found New Kingdom material, and we would have expected this anyway, honestly, because we have maps of that the highway of Horus that date to both Seti the First and Ramses the Second. So we would absolutely expect New Kingdom material to be there, because that's the Seti the First and Ramses the Second are Dynasty 19. So absolutely, we would have expected it. They have found material there now, and it was a really good discovery. It's actually a really big fort. I think they'll going to be still excavating that for a long time to come, because it was probably the largest fort on that highway. It also had a lot of satellite sites too. So it's going to take them a long time to get through that all. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for the sponsor to this question. Okay, the next super chat here. We at the end of the super chats already? Okay, we actually have a super chat here from Jack Ray. $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And again, thank you for sponsoring those memberships, and thank you so much for your earlier super chat of $50. We really appreciate that. Your support has helped keep this channel afloat, and we really do appreciate it. Okay, and he asks, are there any remains found of Egyptian scribal error checking of documents, for example, word count or letter counts on a page? Great question. No, we don't. Now, we do find errors. We do find corrections. So we do find both scribal errors and scribal corrections. What we don't find is error checking. And I assume you mean like CRC checking. Okay? So, actually, we do not. The earliest example of error checking we find in any document is actually the Masoretic text. And this is fascinating. Fascinating. If you open up a Masoretic text, let me see if I have one here that preserves. I don't think I Bible here for a moment if it has it. Alright, mine doesn't have it. But I had one once that a Hebrew Bible that had it. If you look at, say, a Masoretic text like the Aleppo Codex, you'll notice that on the column on the sides are letters. Okay? And for the longest time, scholars, like for hundreds of years, couldn't figure out what those letters were on the side of the columns. What that was a kind of CRC check. Basically, when a manuscript of say, the Hebrew Masoretic text was written, you could count the letters, divide them, and if you had spelled all the letters correct, it should equal that letter in the column. This dates from the 8th to the 10th century AD, so it's relatively late. But that's sort of our earliest example of error checking in a document. So, I mean, it's fascinating to see that. But the secret of that had been basically lost until the 20th century when someone figured out, hey, these letters, I mean, it was originally thought by scholars that was just decoration. It was thought that the letters on the side of the Masoretic text were just decoration, you know? But it was a checksum. It was a checksum for data integrity. So, really interesting that this had been developed, say, long before the computer, just to make sure the copyist got it right. But we don't see it any earlier than that. The Egyptians didn't develop, as far as I know, any sort of checksum or CRC codes or anything like that. It's just one of those things that seems to have come in, say, medieval Judaism. So anyway, thank you for that great question. I hope that helps. Strangely enough, we only see this, by the way, in the Masoretic text. We don't see this in, say, the Babylonian Masoretic markings. So it seems to be part of the Tiberian system. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Hope that helped, and great question. Okay, Asim Weir for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Is abuse by one spouse a biblically valid reason to divorce them? It can be. Again, this is a case-by-case basis. Now, if there's any real, if there is a fear of death here, get out. Do not go. Do not collect 200. Get out. Attempted murder is a de facto divorce. Period. Yeah, that's why one of the reasons why divorce was granted. Yeah, basically, attempted murder is a de facto divorce. At that point, you get out. I don't care if you're the man or the woman. Because frankly, the way that spouse abuse works is 50% it's the man, 50% it's the woman. So it doesn't matter if you're the husband or the wife. If your spouse has tried to kill you, get out. That is a complete self-preservation is a completely biblical reason to divorce. And I shouldn't even have to explain that. But, you know, I know there's some idiots out there that think that you should stick it through no matter what. No. That's not the way this works. God hates divorce, but God also hates murder.
It's murder more.
He hates murder a lot more. So if it's coming down to that, get out. Now, at the same time, too, we also have to be very cognizant, too, of what we mean by abuse. Okay? Now, there's several kinds of abuse. And not all abuse is the same. And not all of it is of the same degree. If there's a lot of in some cases it's psychological abuse. Should you be treating your spouse like that? No. Does it happen occasionally in a marriage? It could, yeah. And should that result in a divorce? Not necessarily. But that should also be then taken to, say, a counseling situation, and there should be, see if there's any possibility of reconciliation. Okay? But if it's physical abuse, if it can result in the death of a spouse, get out. That's a no-brainer. Okay? So anyway, that's my opinion on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. A very generous super chat here from Josh Nichols for $49.99. Thank you very much for that really generous super chat. Discuss a theological topic of your choosing. That is a wonderful super chat. I really appreciate your commentary. Thanks. I don't even know what to choose here. I mean, there's a lot of topics you could choose from. Yeah, Lewis Molinism. Adam, I might talk about Molinism if I knew more about it. We're working on Molinism. I have to do some more reading on middle knowledge, honestly, before I come to any sort of opinion on Molinism. So I'd appreciate in the future you'd be just a little more specific about this. Okay. Sure, we can pass the book. There's actually several good books on Molinism and middle knowledge, but there's one that's actually pretty darn good. I need to go through with a fine-tooth comb, and I haven't yet. But this is from John Lang, Middle Knowledge. Human Freedom in Divine Sovereignty. So that's a pretty good book on it, but again, it's something I need to go through myself. My producer's already read it.
No,
Oh, you got to force the paper, okay.
And we haven't read the original Molinism.
Yeah, we need to read Molinas too.
If you ever read something, go. But that is.
It's a good starting point anyway if you want to discuss the whole topic of middle knowledge, which you have to if you're going to discuss Molinism. So so anyway, I'm not really prepared to discuss just a topic off the top of my head on theology, because there's actually so many topics. So anyway, it's just I would prefer a question, honestly, than basically a So anyway, I want to thank you anyway for that super chat. As I said, it's really hard to just pick a topic and just go for it. But if you pick a topic, yeah, sure, I'll talk about it. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Really, really appreciate it. It's really generous of you, and I so very much appreciate it. But again, be a little less open-ended on this. Just please, please. I'd appreciate it. Discuss the life universe and everything. Pick a topic in that.
Question.
Let's see. Jack Ray says, would you please discuss a theological topic? You wanted a question. Yeah, that's no more specific. Oh, okay, there's a theological question. By Moriel Rorschach. What is your favorite topping on fried spam? 10 minutes in an air fryer is magic. A fried spam is good. Okay? There's nothing wrong with fried spam. I haven't had it in ages, but fried spam's delicious.
Almost went.
Yes, we did. We almost did go to the Spam Museum. Yeah, we did live in Wisconsin. Was that in Wisconsin or was that in I think that is in Minnesota.
It was when we were doing that.
Yeah, we was doing it, but I think the museum is actually in Minnesota. Yeah. We kept driving by the Spam Museum. It was a missed opportunity. Yeah. Spam can be good. Fried spam can be good in many ways. I mean, I like it a little bit of say avocado oil and fried in that. And then topped with pineapple. Ooh, topped with pineapple or a little bit of ketchup. A little bit of ketchup is also very good for fried spam. So, absolutely delicious. Absolutely delicious. Now I've got all the spam haters against me. Okay, so there's the deep theological topic. Spam fried or spam not? Fried spam, delicious. Absolutely delicious. Okay, so with that pressing theological question out of the way, let's go on to the next super chat. 916. Mystery flavor. Spam is unjustly maligned. Absolutely it is. Yep, absolutely. Spam is unjustly maligned. It is. I mean, it's a kind of, it's a compressed, spam is essentially a ham that has been compressed and canned. Yeah, it's pressure cooked in a can. I mean, it's just this really, and I think it's delicious. I mean, it's really good. But then again, too, I kind of like canned meat. I also used to love, say, canned corned beef as well, though. So, very, very good. Very delicious. So, again, I tend to go for canned meats. Whether it's, say, spam, corned beef, tuna, salmon, delicious. Even canned oysters, delicious. Especially with mayo on a cracker, just ah. Okie dokie. Guilty pleasures. Just guilty pleasures. Okay. So anyway, I want to thank Josh Nichols for that really generous super chat, even though we never did discuss a theological topic. Next time you want me to discuss something, be a little more specific. Otherwise, you get the spam. The theology of spam. Yum. This is how conversations go off the rails and into a rabbit hole. This is how channel lore develops. Exactly. Okay. BC for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are some things you wish Christians better understood about election and salvation? Are there common misconceptions? Yes, there are. Here's something I wish Christians better understood about election. Election gives you access to the gospel. It doesn't make you saved. Okay? So I wish Christians better understood that. Election is basically your invitation to the community. So all of Israel were elect. Most Israelites turned out to be evil Baal worshippers. Okay? So, I wish, first of all, that they understood that election is not a guarantee of salvation. Election is a guarantee to access to salvation, to the message. Other things I wish they knew about salvation is that salvation is basically your relationship to Jesus Christ, not your, say, perfection regarding sin. Too often, Christians misunderstand salvation to be a works-based salvation, whereas you have to be sinless. Christ took care of the sin problem. So it comes down to salvation comes down to, do you accept Jesus Christ and his gift of salvation? Did you accept that? And are you clinging to that? People don't go to hell because they're sinners. They go to hell because they reject Jesus Christ. So So, there's a lot of misunderstandings here regarding election and salvation. And frankly, election is not one of those things that's sort of, we always hear about talked in terms of Calvinism, but it's also a problem for Arminians too. Because Arminians also believe in a kind of election, and they have the same sort of problems with it as well. So it's one of those problems that sort of bridges soteriology. But yeah, I wish Christians better understood that election's not a guarantee; it's an invitation. And I wish that, again, people understood that salvation has more to do with relationship than good works or being sinless. And I think a lot of that misunderstanding leads to pet sins, where, some sins in Christian communities are seen as more grievous than others, when all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So I think there's a lot of
But it's them. God is the one that walks through Abraham.
Yeah.
Because Abraham is not able the term.
Yeah.
Of the covenant.
That's a good point. My producer brought up here, we see Bonbon here trying to figure this all out within a Judaic point of view. To put it in the Judaic perspective, you have to say go to the Abrahamic covenant, where Abraham has his covenant with God, and Abraham brings the parts of the animal, and they divide the animals in half, and this is a suzerain treaty. The people are supposed to walk between the pieces, and that's to show if the people didn't obey the covenant, they'd be killed just like the animals. But what happens in the Abrahamic covenant is God walks through the pieces and devours them. It's a one-sided covenant. God does all the work of the covenant. So that is the understanding, from even a Judaic perspective, is, Abraham believed according to faith, not by his works. So even in, the Abrahamic covenant, this is a faith perspective. It's not a sin or works perspective. So, again, it comes down to how are we understanding salvation and election? Well, God does it all. It's all God. It's all God, and we're just sort of reaping the benefits of it. So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from Andrew Tinsley for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there evidence that Ramses II had a son die in the plague of the firstborn? We don't have evidence of the plague, but that's also because that whole cemetery had been ripped up. Now, we know that mid-Dynasty 19, and this is during the reign of Ramses II, the city of Avaris, where the Israelites would have lived, was abandoned. And it was turned into a cemetery. The whole city, except for the port, was turned into a big cemetery. Unfortunately, that cemetery has been ripped up by agricultural leveling. Now, we do know that the son of Ramses II was buried at Thebes. And we don't have his body. Some people speculate that we could have it, but we don't have any proof that we have it. We do know that the son of Ramses II, the firstborn son, Amenhotep, he died in around the 25th year of Ramses II. And that would be mid-Dynasty 19. We do know he was around 25 years old. So, we do know that he was an adult. We do know he was crown prince. We do know he died unexpectedly. We also know he was a father, and his son died around the same time. So, also at the same time, a vizier dies. So, while suggestive, it could be just coincidence that all these people died at once. But at the same time, too, it is suggestive. So, we do have evidence that Ramses II's firstborn died. Unexpectedly. I mean, he was a young man. He was a young man with many years ahead of him. We do know others died at roughly the same time. And we also know that Egypt had plagues. A lot of them. So plagues were not that unusual even in Egypt. In fact, there is even some suggestion that the plague in Egypt was carried over to the Hittite Empire, where it did a number on their population as well. So, we do know that there were plagues during Dynasty 19. We do know that the city was abandoned in Dynasty 19 and turned into a mass cemetery. We also know that that cemetery has been ripped up by agricultural leveling. So we're going to have limited evidence here, but it is suggestive. So we can't prove it. We have some evidence, though. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hmm? It's actually a really good question. I think we're getting close to the end of the super chats anyway, so we can probably take that one. Yep. Looks like we're at the end of the super chats. So, end of the super chats, we can go to some non-super chats. And Bonbon asks actually a very good question here. Oh, Bonbon, you repeated a question. Not cool. Yeah, he repeated the sacred space one. That one's not getting answered. Which is a shame, but we are very strict about the no repeated questions. But we'll take this one. Yeah, you didn't change it enough, dude. All right, well, we'll take this one. How do Egyptologists feel when they conduct autopsies on mummies of pharaohs in the past? Is it like doing it on anyone else, or is there a diff feeling when someone important like pharaohs? Okay, first of all, Egyptologists don't do autopsies on mummies anymore. That's considered to be completely off limits. We now use passive techniques to examine mummies. Okay, so we can use scopes, we can use X-rays, MRIs, scanners of various types. But we can't. We do not do. There's really actually even no purpose to doing autopsies on a mummy anymore, because frankly, carving into a mummy is like carving into leather. The flesh on a mummy is tough. It's really tough. So it really doesn't do any good to cut into it. There's also no internal organs on a mummy generally. So it doesn't even help you to carve into it. We actually get more information from, say, CT scans, X-rays, and MRIs that can actually probe through the text. BC human jerky. Yeah, pretty much. It is human jerky. Because it's salted flesh. Now... I think this doctor substantiated belief. I think this mummy died from dehydration. He ate a salt lick. That's how he died. Yeah, so yeah, pretty much. So anyway, what we can see through, say, CT scans and those sort of things is we can see stuff like cancer. You know, we can tell when some poor Egyptian suffer from cancer through, say, X-rays and CT scans. Broken bones. Say, you know, some, like, for example, if they broke a hip, you know, we'd be able to see that. We'd be able to see... We can even see, say, remains of, say, organs that were completely removed. Like, for example, in some third intermediate period mummies, they didn't remove the brain. It was just dehydrated along with the rest of the corpse. And we can see a film of the remains of the brain. What? That is funny. Let's see if I can find that here. Yep, they all died of dehydration. Suspicious. They all died in the same way. Yeah. So anyway, you can actually tell a lot that way. Now, as I said, with a probe, you can actually go into the nasal cavity and you can see anything on the inside of, say, the skull area and down into the throat. But that's going to be pretty much the limits of what you're going to be able to see in most cases. So you can tell physical damage, but the whole idea of, I mean, it's even sort of at this point, it's not even considered to be good process anymore to unwrap a mummy. So it's almost entirely now, we almost entirely now use non-invasive techniques to examine a mummy these days. So if we are fortunate to have a mummy that's still wrapped, we keep it wrapped. With all the trinkets inside, still wrapped. So, so anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It's a great question, though, on what we do these days to examine these things. And again, we also want to use the least invasive processes imaginable. Okay, actually, that's actually another good question. A good follow-up question here from Costco. So how do we get mitochondrial DNA samples? We can take small amounts of flesh for purposes of doing DNA extraction and sampling. The thing is with DNA, the amount of flesh needed is so small that it really is not intrusive. Like, all you need is a couple skin flakes, and you've got a DNA sample. So, you know, that's acceptable. Even a hair follicle will do the job. So, you know, as long as it's been the sample has not been contaminated, you can easily get a DNA profile from a very, very small sample, which is why they allow it. It's just such a small sample. And once you have that DNA record, you can keep it. You can use it in future comparisons. So you only need to do it once. So it's DNA work is very, very well refined these days. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat, and thank you very much for that. Where's not that super chat? That question and that follow up. Very much appreciated. Okay. Let's see if there's some more questions here. Oh. We got some very, very generous super chats here from Slade Neighbors. I want to thank him very much tonight, who gave us some contributions on PayPal to the effect of $400. We really appreciate that. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. Very, very much appreciate all the assistance that you've given us. Very much appreciate that. So I want to thank you so much for your support. Okay. So going back and looking for non-super chats here. Linguist Ammo. He asked the question, I was going to study pre-dynastic Egypt, but I was wondering what you thought about Tomb UJ in Abydos, I think. Oh, I can't remember whose tomb that. I think that's the tomb of Narmer, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. It's been a long time since I've looked at the pre-dynastic tombs at Abydos. It's a very interesting site, I'll say that. It spans... You find tombs in that sort of that area of Abydos that go from, say, Nagata 3 period to Dynasty 2. Very interesting because it's a huge diversity of tombs. You got everything from, and they're all royal tombs. They're all royal tombs. You got these things from like little tiny pit tombs, like the earliest tombs of the Nagata 3 kings are just these little tiny pits, and they're on the surface. So it's just, I mean, it's just like a little brick brick pit. I mean, they dug a hole, put a brick wall around it, and called that a tomb. To these are very, very elaborate tombs, like, for example, the tomb of Kasekemwe. So there's a lot of interesting stuff at Abydos. But I'd have to look it up again to UJ to remember exactly what goes with it. As I said, it's been a long time since I've looked at the pre-dynastic stuff. So there was a time when I was really into this pre-dynastic stuff, and I could have told you off the top of my head, but it's been so long since I've looked at it, I just can't tell you at the moment. So anyway, it's a great question. Thank you very much for the question. But it's as I say, wonderful site. I was actually hoping to visit it the last couple times I was at Abydos, but it hasn't been open in years. Those pre-dynastic tombs have not been open to the public for years. So you got to get really, really lucky to go take a look at those tombs these days. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, take this one here from Joheyua. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. And he asks, are there any Egyptian records or references to the plagues? One would think such great events were written down somewhere. There's no references to practically any plagues in Egypt. Here's the thing, when we're dealing with ancient Egypt, 99% of records in Egypt are actually religious documents. Okay? They are essentially religious offerings. So most of what we find about the history of Egypt is written on temple walls as an offering to the gods. So what we find is that they don't talk about their failures. They don't talk about their disasters. For example, we know that the Egyptian army was defeated many times. And yet the Egyptians never talk about a military defeat even once. They just never talk about it. The Mesopotamians, the Assyrians, will talk about their military defeats, but the Egyptians won't. And the reason why is because it's a religious taboo. It's kind of like Israelite offerings. You don't give the spotted lamb to your God. You only give the God the best of the best. Egyptians were kind of the same way. They didn't give failures to their gods. They didn't give plagues to their gods. They didn't give natural disasters to their gods. They only gave the good stuff. So Egyptian records never reference the plagues. Now, with that said, they probably would have recorded such events in their day rolls. Now, the problem with the day roll... Now, what's a day roll? A day roll is essentially a kind of basically running record. And this would have been kept at the royal court. We have a couple examples, small fragments of day rolls from the reign of Ramses III, where they would record the day and then what happened in whatever the site was, whether the court or the local village or whatever. The problem is we have very few of those day rolls. We have none from, say, any of the capital cities. And they were all written on papyrus, and none of them survived. So that's where we're likely to find references to a plague if there was one. But unfortunately, we're just dealing with an absence of records here because of survival in the archaeological record. And that's just sort of the problem with this, is we're dealing with a paucity of evidence caused by the failure of the archaeological record to preserve it. So, you just have to be realistic about this, that, you're just not going to find this, because almost all the records of Egypt that survive are religious records. And that's because they were carved in stone, not recorded on papyrus. So, and I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, we've got another super chat here. So, next super chat here is from Eddie P. for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he writes, CN Theonomy is growing in the U.S. Can Old Testament Israel be used as a justification for these views? I need a quick reminder here. What is Theonomy? Just a second here. All right. Oh, okay. Government society ruled by divine law. Okay, I get it. Oh, I see what he means. Christian nationalism. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, there is a Christian nationalist movement. I mean, that is true. But there's always been that element in society. Okay. I don't think Old Testament Israel can be used to justify that view, honestly. The fact is that most of the Old Testament law was ritual law. The vast majority of it, like something like 70 or 80% of the Mishpachot, the commandments, were set up towards ritual purposes, like how you made sacrifices, what constitutes ritual purity, could you do a sacrifice outside of the ritual place, could you mix fibers, what was a kosher, what was okay under the kosher law. This is the vast majority of Old Testament law, was this ritual law. And frankly, none of that applies anymore. So I don't think you can use that to govern a modern nation. It was never designed to govern a modern nation. It was designed to govern a theocratic kingdom. And just simply put, the Old Testament Israel was a theocratic kingdom. Yes, it had a monarchy, but it had a monarchy that was beholden to its royal cult, which was basically a cult to Yahweh. So I really don't think that that's a feasible thing anymore. Even sort of the tax laws that, that say modern society, I mean, the few tax laws they had, wouldn't even stand up to muster today. So I think it would be a tremendous failure to try to use Old Testament law to govern a modern nation like the U.S. Society's gotten a lot more complex, honestly. I mean, you can probably glean some principles from it. That might be okay. I mean, there's some things that still survive, like thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, but to make that a part of criminal law, I mean, thou shalt not commit adultery. I mean, you can't make that part of criminal law. And there's also some question of whether it ever was criminal law. There's that too. There's the whole question is whether the Old Testament law was case law or prescriptive law. The evidence seems to suggest that it was case law more than it was, say, prescriptive law. Only becoming prescriptive law in, say, by the time of, say, the Pharisees and the 1st century BC. So yeah, I don't think it's viable, and I don't think it ever was used in that particular way. So if the Israelites in the Old Testament weren't using it this way, that that sort of demands the question: is should we use it like that today? And the answer is invariably no. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped answer the question, and very much appreciate it. Okay, let's look at that question. Okay, let's take this one here from Let Me Explain, Followers of the Shepherd. Nice little question there. Bible? What? Well, we won't take that last one because I don't know Sirach. But I'll take this one here. All right. Luke chapter 14. And starting at verse 7 here. And he's actually talking about... Oops, I forgot to bring up the question. What are the places of honor at the table in Luke 14:7? Okay. And the text says, and he, this is Christ, began speaking a parable to the invited guests when he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him, and he who invited you shall both come and say to you, give place to this man. Then in disgrace you proceed to occupy the last place. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when one friend who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, and he who humbles himself shall be exalted. All right. So, here's what's going on. He goes to the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees. So this is a context to this. Christ goes to the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees, and there's all these Pharisees there. He's not alone there. The Pharisees are there too. And they're jockeying for the places of honor. Okay? They're jockeying for that. And Christ is watching the behavior of the Pharisees. They're pushing their way to the places of honor at the table. They're trying to get as close to the host as possible. Now, he amplifies this by using the illustration of a wedding. Now, we know, if you've ever been to a wedding, you know that there's the table of the bride and the groom and the parents. They're all at one table. They're all one table. It's like pushing your way onto the groom's the bridal table. Okay? Or, and a lot of weddings are like this. Where, say, the closer you are to the family, the closer you are to the pulpit in the ceremony. So basically, these are people who are trying to get as much influence as they can by being as close to the host as possible to show their importance. And Christ is basically saying, hey, you know what? The kingdom of heaven here is a bit like this. you try to push your way to prominence, you're going to be told, hey, go to the back. And you'll notice that at that point, there's no other place but the back seat. So at that point, you have been embarrassed because you've thought yourself more than you are. So, I mean, he's basically reminding the Pharisees here that, you know, if you think you're that important and that proud, there's a humbling coming. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. BC, whatever, I just want to be sat as far away from the PA system as possible. Oh, yeah. Jack Ray, getting told to take a back seat, shame. Well, yeah, it is. And in this culture, definitely it would be shame.
I'll man the projector.
BC, you know what? I'll man the projector. Bring me a plate. Yeah, I'm okay with that too, honestly. But yeah, this is a society of status. Okay? First century Judaism and a lot of ancient Near Eastern cultures highly prized status. So, these are people, religious leaders, that are fighting for status. And they think they're getting their status by being as close to the host as possible. Whether that's the host of this dinner here that they're at, or close to the host at, say, a wedding, which would be the bridal party. And he's telling these people, you're thinking more of yourself than you should. And the kingdom of heaven is like that. Whoever will exalt himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles themselves will be exalted. He's giving them a very, very important spiritual truth through these parties. So, anyway, thank you very much for that interesting question. We really appreciate it. And it's actually a really good question, but that's sort of the context of what's going on here. Alrighty here. Another question here from Jehoiah. He asks, what do you think about the popular theory that Atlantis is the Eye of Sahara? I think it's complete baloney. There's no evidence that there was ever a city there. There's no evidence of any civilization there. It looks like a complete natural formation. I think it's complete hogwash. Where's the evidence? I mean, if it is Atlantis, there should be evidence of civilization there. You know, evidence of, culture and human inhabitation. There's nothing. It's just a natural geological formation. And we see lots of natural geological formations that look like stuff. We all know Atlantis is in the Pegasus galaxy. Stargate told me. But to get back to the question here, here's one of the problems that we find is people see stuff in geological formations that sometimes appear to be man-made but aren't. One of the big examples that I encounter frequently is Ron Wyatt's Noah's Ark. There is no question that is a natural geological formation. There's nothing under the sand to indicate petrified wood or anything like that. But it looks kind of ark-like. So they just sort of ran with it. No evidence at all. Yeah, it's good enough. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly here. Natural geological formation that looks like stuff. Ron Wyatt's Noah's Ark, exactly what I just said. Super neat rock formation, sure. And it's actually it's not even a complete rock. It's more like sandish. It's an aggregate. So I mean, even it's just it's not petrified at all. So it's just embarrassing, just embarrassing. So again, I think this quote Atlantis candidate is in the same category. Really, the Eye of Sahara is just something that looks vaguely civilized from orbit, but there's nothing on the ground. Absolutely nothing on the ground. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Well, we have very few super chats tonight, so I might get to go. I might get to cut early. Oh, really? BC sound pigments for underwater construction. In addition to the sound foxes. Oh, by the way, for celebrating our 10,000 subscriber milestone, we're gonna offer a new T-shirt design in our merch store, which I think you'll enjoy. So you got that to look forward to seeing that next week. Okay, let's take another non-super chat. Okay. Let me explain. Now, this one's kind of interesting, too. Was it common to believe elbows on the table are improper? Asking in reference to Sirach 41:19. Okay, I don't know Sirach 41:19. Okay, can I even look that one up? Let me see if I have that. Look that up in my Apocrypha here. Or Sirach. And this is, of course, in the Apocrypha. Yeah, that can't be correct, because 41:19 is giving me defrauding. Okay, it's an 18. All right, bring it up here. Sirach 41:18 from the New American Bible. Be ashamed of theft from people where you settle, and of stretching out your elbow when you dine. All right. Now, I have to understand something here about Middle Eastern culture. Is they didn't eat at a table with chairs. Okay, so this isn't the same as you are on. You're not on, say, you're not sitting at a table with chairs. They didn't dine that way. Ancient Israelite people dined reclined. So they're lying on the ground when they eat. And the table is a place of service. So they'd have a small table where they would put the dishes on. So, so the whole idea of stretching out your arm is a bit unclear here, because in a sense you're going to have to reach the food, and it's more, so they're not going to be putting their arms necessarily on the table anyway, because you don't eat that way in the ancient Near East. So it seems to be more the idea that your arm never leaves the table. So you've stretched out your arm, your elbow, you've rested it on the table, and you're not leaving it. So you're not serving yourself. You're just more or less eating from the dish. Okay? Okay, so It's not that it's a rudeness of manner here of oh, you've done some, say, mismanners faux pas. It's more along the line that you're a glutton. You're refusing to leave the table. You didn't take your portion and go. You're just staking it. Your arm is on the table and you're just shoveling it in. So that seems to be more the implication here. Now again, I don't consider Apocrypha to be, say, scripture, but there are some remnants of at least the culture that is recorded in, say, the Apocrypha here. Like this is all this here. This passage, as I look at this passage, just cursory here, is sort of more of a guide of manners. Like, for example, in 19, of refusing to give when asked, or defrauding another of his appointed share. Okay, defrauding another of what they're owed, like food. Yeah. Okay, I'll put that comment up because that's actually nails it. Doctor Substantiated Belief here nails it. I'm imagining someone at the Golden Corral just eating right where they serve the food. That's exactly it. Yeah, for anyone who's not American, Golden Corral is an all-you-can-eat buffet. So you're going right up to the buffet. You're sticking your head underneath the sneeze guard, and you're just shoveling it in. That's exactly the illustration here. But yeah, this Sirach does seem to be here recording, common courtesy and manners and acts of shame. Verse 20 here, of failing to return a greeting or of rebuffing a friend. Now that would be in an ancient Near Eastern context. That's really rude. Somebody greets you, you return the greeting. And of course, you're going to be sitting there for like 45 minutes, an hour, exchanging greetings. Yeah, that's rituals in a lot of culture, and in a high context culture, like what you find in the ancient Near East, greeting is important. Yeah. You ask about their spouse, you ask about their children, you ask about their goats. How are the chickens doing? How is your second cousin who had the flu? How is the crops going? And
why you live in a small town?
Yeah.
For people you keep track of.
So failing to give a greeting that's long enough is going to be an act of shame. Verse 21, of gazing at a married woman. Even Christ said, if you lust after a woman in your heart, you've committed adultery with her. And of entertaining thoughts about another's wife. Trifling with servant girl you have. And of violating her couch. These are all sort of acts of shame. So, there's the Sirach here is recording a code of conduct. And basically the elbow where you dine, stretching out your elbow, is essentially eating from the trough. It's...
Yeah, the image of the Golden Corral.
Yeah, the image of the Golden Corral just nails it. It really nails it. Okay. There's another super chat here from Historical Gaming Strategy here. For $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Who was Ursu? He's presented as a character in Total War Pharaoh. Ursu was a Canaanite. We're not exactly sure what kingdom he's called Ursu of the Shasu. Okay, so he's a Shasu. He's a tribal leader of the Shasu. He reigns around the time of Ramses III. He's also into some of the successors of Ramses III as well, such as our some of his other nearby kings. So Ursu's got a very long reign. We're not told. We're told that he's sort of he conducts a lot of war. So he's a warrior king as such. We don't know too much about him. He's only mentioned a few times in the Egyptian texts in basically the late Egyptian miscellanies. So basically around the beginning of Dynasty 20s where we encounter him. So roughly the reign of Seknach, Ramses III, and perhaps even Ramses IV. So that's where his timeline is. But he's basically a Shasu. He's a leader of the Shasu. Apart from that, we know very little about that other than he conducted a lot of campaigns. So anyway, we're not even sure if he was a vassal or what was his relation was with the Egyptian court. So, but we just don't know a lot about him. As like we don't know a lot about the Shasu in general. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But yeah, he was a Shasu. Okay, I'll take that question then. Warrior of the Most High, what should I do as a convert if I don't have access to a local church or fellowship gatherings? Well, there's a couple things you can do. If there is a local group, like, let's say, a home church. Now, a home church can be very small. It can be 2 or 3 people. You know, if you can find a fellow Christian to worship with, that is better than going at it alone. Okay? So, a lot of home churches started off as basically a gathering of 2 or 3 people. So, that's enough. That's really enough to start a home church. If you have nobody, I mean, there are some places in the, like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, if you're a convert in Saudi Arabia, and it's illegal to be a Christian, you know, there might be 20 people spread out over the countryside, you know, and in those situations, no gathering is going to be feasible. In that case, you're basically, you have no choice other than to, you know, pray, read the scriptures on your own. It's not ideal. It's not ideal, but sometimes it's the only option. But if there's no church in your local area, as long as you know a couple Christians, even one Christian, there's no reason why you can't have a home gathering together. And that's perfectly acceptable. The first churches in the Christian church were done like that. You have tried to appoint among yourself somebody who will lead it so it's not disorganized, but you know, that's how home churches began. Yeah. Essentially just agree on the book of the Bible and start reading it and studying it together. And that's the way you sort of conduct have a church without there being a physical building in the area that does this. Yeah. Where did you see that? Go and see it. Okay. 1000 Clever Boy said, most churches stream these days and have podcasts of their sermons. So there's that too. It's not the same. Yeah, that unfortunately, the streaming leads to a very passive Christian experience. This is one of the things that they've sort of discovered now. Now that we've had, you know, 3 years of Zooms, the whole streaming thing is a complete failure for certain activities, like education. educational experts are pretty much agreed across the board that Zooms were a failure. They are, because there's more that's taught in these meetings than just information transfer. It's a matter of participation, feeling part of the collective whole. Subtle display of body language. There's a lot that goes on in information that's communicated that can't be communicated through an online experience. This is why Hebrews 10 tells you not to forsake the church. Yeah. 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 I mean, I'm responding to you real time, but even these live streams are not a substitute for church. They're not a substitute for church. And 1000 Clever Boys says it pretty well here. Christians are not to do life alone. Absolutely. Absolutely. We are to as iron sharpens iron, so one Christian strengthens another. So, Historical Strategy Gaming says Egypt seems pretty tolerant to Christians. Sometimes. Not perfect, but better than Saudi Arabia. Oh, yeah. Totally. Oh, yeah. Saudi Arabia is very intolerant to Christianity. Egypt can be tolerant to Christianity, although there has been times of violence against Christians, even in Egypt. You know, you'll occasionally hear some Coptic church getting burned to the ground by a riot, and then they just build a bigger, nicer one. It's like
they get stuck in a dump.
Yeah, yeah, they get pushed out of the city into a dump, and they build a huge, beautiful cathedral there. You know, it's just, yeah. I mean, you go to Luxor today, and you see this there's this magnificent Coptic church, beautiful. I mean, just gold dome and you know, towers there, and just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And then you realize it's like 15 years old because they burnt the previous one to the ground. So what do? They build it bigger and better. It's like, that's a great response to that, you know. So, you know, Egypt isn't always tolerant. You know, during the Arab Spring, there were several churches that were burnt to the ground. And again, what did the Copts do? They built them bigger and better. So anyway, let's take a couple more super chats, and I think we'll probably call it really early. Let's see here. Up here. Okay. BC asks, have you done a video on Groundhog? Would be interested to know more. Okay. Groundhog, for those of you who don't know, is a piece of chronology software. Basically, we named it Groundhog after sort of the proverbial, you know, Groundhog Day. It's a piece of software that can take a chronology and test it to see if it's internally consistent and valid. Okay. It also can reconstruct chronologies. So it's been an excellent tool for evaluating whether a chronological hypothesis is internally consistent or not. Now, we did a short on Groundhog some time ago. I haven't done a full-length video on it. It does require a bit of explanation, so it was, at the time, that short was kind of, what are you talking about? What's this thing, Groundhog? Why would you want to know about chronology? You know, it kind of got the, you know, why is this even necessary? So it would probably take a fair bit to do a video on this, but there's no reason why we couldn't do one either. Yeah, we can put it on the ideas list though. Definitely, it'd be a good thing to cover. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate it. We haven't actually done a full-length video on this yet, but there's no reason why we couldn't. Historical strategy gaming. Have you ever been to the Valley of the Kings before? Oh yes, several times. Yeah, I've been to the Valley of the Kings several times. It's great. I mean, I love Valley of the Kings. I will say this: I prefer temples over, say, Kings Valley. You know, the tombs are great, especially, you know, taking pictures of some of the nicer tombs, like Ramses the what was it now? The 7th has a gorgeous tomb. So yeah, been there several times. Sometimes I was there when it was stinking hot, but yeah, it's definitely a must see for anyone who's traveling to Egypt. So absolutely great place to go. I would highly recommend it. Anyone who goes to Egypt should go to the Valley of the Kings. Okay. Was the Valley of the Kings really hot? Oh, you have no idea. Not as hot as Deir el Medina, though. Whoa. Deir el Medina was just scorching. It was 53 degrees Celsius, just like, I think it was 117 Fahrenheit. That was brutal. That one was really brutal. I did that during the last days of July. Terrible time to go if you're going to go. No tourists around, surprisingly. But I was there for doing photographs. So for me, doing that, you know, it was important for me to get great photographs without a lot of tourists in the way. Now, you can do photographs, I realize you can do photographs without tourists there by biding your time, but you're also always being interrupted. So it's, I was on a really tight schedule, so I couldn't afford to have a lot of tourists, you know, nosing around. So, but yeah, really, really, really hot. You know, my wife texted me and she asked me, you know, if I was frying, and I told her no, I was baking. It was bad. I mean, it was really bad. Mm-hmm. 10:07. I'll get 10:07. Jack Ray asks, were there any irreligious writings on those temple walls? Not officially. Okay. Now, once a temple fell into decay and the priests abandoned service there, you'd get people coming in afterwards and writing graffiti on the walls. And those could be of an irreligious nature. But they weren't official writings either. You didn't find secular writings on the walls. Okay? So almost all the writings on the temple walls had to have a religious context. Even something like, say, the Annals of Tutmosis III, which is basically his record of his military campaigns. They're all being dedicated to Amun-Re. So even something like say, the military campaigns that these guys are recording on temple walls, they have a religious bent to them. Like, for example, the Battle of Kadesh that Ramses II records on his mortuary temple, at the temple at Abu Simbel, even at Karnak Temple. You know, basically, he's dedicating that as a victory to Amun-Re. Amun-Re came up. He says Amun-Re came upon me, and I fought like Montu, like a lion. It's all couched in religious language. So there were no purely secular writings on the temple walls that were official. Okay. All the official writings are of a religious nature on these temple walls. So that's a very, very important consideration to keep in mind. They're all religious temples, even the ones that were used for government purposes. And we do find that. Like, for example, the funerary temple of Ramses III at Medina Habu. It started off as a funerary temple, but it was eventually converted into an administrative center. And it remained an administrative center all the way through to the end of Dynasty 20. However, even though it became a government administrative building, there were no secular writings on the walls. It remained, all the writings on it remained religious, even when it did government functions. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you for the question. Good question. Let me explain. Follows the Shepherd asks, what would a priest do if they found graffiti? Well, by the time the graffiti ended up on the walls, the priests had abandoned the temple. So nothing. At that point, there was no... If some guy off the street can come in and write graffiti on the wall, the priests weren't there anymore. They were off somewhere else. So they generally did nothing. So, yeah. So these buildings weren't maintained after the cults abandoned them. They just weren't maintained. They were let to fall apart. We do have some records of temples being restored after they fell into decline. And at that point, they might try to remove it or to wash paint over it. But generally, once a temple was abandoned, that was it. It was usually left to decay. So, thank you for that question. Yeah, Historical Strategy Gaming says there were temples that were converted to churches. Yes, absolutely. Like Luxor Temple was converted into a church. A large part of Dendera Temple was converted into a church. So there were actually many Egyptian temples that were converted into churches because the Egyptian priests abandoned them. Egyptian priests abandoned them, and Christians sort of moved in. Again, they were allowed to decay. We even see a few tombs that were turned into churches. There's an example of a tomb at Beni Hassan that had been converted into a church. Christians basically moved in wherever there was, basically the place was abandoned. The temple of Hathor was also converted to a church at one point as well. You can find crosses on there. So, yeah, many temples were converted to churches just because they were abandoned and suitable buildings still. Okay. I'll take this one from Francis Dobbs. Given your travels in Egypt, do you have sympathies for the monophysite Christians like the Coptic Christians who believe in one nature of Christ? Okay. For those who don't know, basically monophysiteism is the idea that there's only one nature to Christ. So, when Christ ate, God ate. When Christ bled, God bled. When God was omniscient, Christ was omniscient. Okay? So it's a muddling of the two natures of Christ. Uh, don't really need sympathies for this, because most Coptic Christians don't even realize the theology here. You talk to a Coptic Christian, they'll go, yeah, we know that there was some controversy long ago, but that's sort of water on the bridge at this point. They don't really sort of cling hard and fast to that idea of monophysitism. And at the same time, too, some of them will even insist, yeah, it was kind of a confusion of wording more than anything else. So there's a huge question of how monophysite Coptic Christianity really was. Technically, it was, but trying to, again, is this a confusion of terminology, or did they really hold fast and hard to that? Either way, it's been sort of so long that the controversy doesn't even matter to them anymore. So, it's hard to sort of to say to them, okay, yeah, maybe this was not a great idea. When at the same time, too, they just don't really believe it anymore. So, I don't have a sympathy for them one way or the other. As far as the monophysitism is concerned, I do like Coptic Christians. They're great people. I love being around them. I'll worship with them. I have no problems with any of that. But again, they've sort of moved on. So, if they've moved on, I'll let them move on. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, sorry to hear that, Slade. I don't think that was off the mark, but you're free to that opinion. Thank you. We appreciate your help, and again, we appreciate everything you've done for us, and I'm sorry you felt that way. Okay. So, a couple more super chats here, and then we're going to call it a night. Hmm? No, there weren't a lot of them there. I think there was 4 Nubian pharaohs. Let me see here. 5. There are 5 Nubian pharaohs. Shashank the Third. Sorry, not Shashank the Third. I'm sorry. No, there were 4. Sorry. Pi, Shabako, Shabtiku, and Taharko. So there are 4 Nubian pharaohs. And those are the pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. So, I'm going to take a couple more questions here, and then we're going to call it an early night, because, frankly, first time I probably will be able to get to bed early in a while. Hmm. $8.53, you said? $8.43. Okay. All right, Bonbon asks the question: do you think that one can make the argument that the Torah has been preserved properly due to a blockchain-style way of information transmission and intrinsic decentralization of the Israelites? Well, there's a lot loaded into that one. Um, hmm. I'd probably have to get what you mean by blockchain style way of information transmission. Um, I don't see that per se, but maybe you can make an argument for that. I don't know. Um, as far as the intrinsic decentralization of the Israelites, I think it helped preserve things, definitely, because we did have now text type families that did actually help us to find out what is the original text underneath it all. So yeah, the intrinsic decentralization did help things. There's no question about that. As far as the blockchain, I'd have to see more information to make an evaluation. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, I think we're going to take only one more question for the night here, and then we will call it. Moriel says, blockchain works on the idea that a lot of different people have access to the full chain, so a change in one would be provable. Not just one book, but a lot of people with copies of that book. Yeah, in that respect, absolutely. In a proof of work kind of way, definitely. So yeah, I can see that as an argument. Yeah. 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 And then again, we have a lot of copies. So because we have a lot of copies, it's easy to prove, that the Bible has maintained integrity over time. So, you know, so I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to call it a night here. Wow. I can see that. Ryan Naylor, watching from Prague. Excellent. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We always love hearing about our international viewers. So fantastic. Great to see you here tonight. Okay, I'm going to get one more non-super chat in, and then we're going to call it. So. Okay. It's an interesting question. We'll take this last one. This will be the last question of the night. Okay, from Noah Cavallari. Are there any treatises or recorded attempts to divine predict weather from a more secular point of view in Bronze Age Near East? Okay, now we do have treatises to try to predict the future. Weather does not seem to be among those. There are a lot more to predict, say, the future of a course of events, whether a person lived or died, Will someone fall in love with you? We do have those treatises. We have basically divination texts to try to instruct people on how to read certain omens. But weather does not seem to be among them, which is kind of odd because people are always today wanting to know what the weather was. And even back then, they did. They just didn't seem to. They didn't seem to be that fascinated. They didn't use divination in that way. So they would divine something to see if they would have a military victory. That they did. They did that actually frequently. So, basically you go to war, you do the sacrifice, you read the goat entrails, and the priest tells you if you're going to win or not. But they didn't do it for the weather. And that's very, very odd. Because as I said, and some of this has to do with the fact that weather was very consistent in the Near East. Weather did not fluctuate that much. Now, in Israel, you could have storms, but that happened during a certain season, during the winter. But the rest of the year, the weather was pretty temperate. Likewise, in Mesopotamia, again, weather was pretty consistent. And even the same in Egypt. You didn't get a lot of storms in Egypt. You might get a major storm once every 100 years. So in an area where the weather doesn't change that frequently, there wasn't a lot of need to predict the weather. Pretty much going to be the same tomorrow as it is today, with some mild temperature variations, but nothing that they thought was very unusual. So you tend to get more weather swings in the temperate climates. So anyway. Jack Ray, forecast for tomorrow, sandstorm. Forecast for the rest of the week, sandstorm. Yeah, that's about it. But sandstorms were even pretty rare, to be honest. They didn't happen very often. So even then, there was no need to no need to predict the future there, because they just weren't that common. You do see them on occasion, but they're still about pretty rare. And in places like the Nile Valley or the Nile Delta, there were no sandstorms, or very few. So, oh boy. Yeah. Occasionally they would get like Egypt, like once every 100 years would get snow. I mean, it happened, but it was so rare. They might get, a rain shower once, maybe 50 years, 20 years, maybe. So, it's not very common. And as I said, it was very, very temperate weather in, say, Mesopotamia. So, anyway, I wanted to... Yeah, snow in Egypt. They do occasionally, very rarely, get snow in Egypt. It happened just recently. Like in, I think, 2015, they had snow in Cairo. Not much. It didn't stay long. It was just for a day, but it was snow. And it came down from the Swiss mountains. So the Swiss mountains crossing the Mediterranean to hit Cairo. So it does happen. It's just not very common. Did it snow in the pyramids last year? Yeah, it might have been last year too. I mean, it wasn't that long ago though. Like a decade ago. I mean, that's like not that long ago. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we lived in Nevada, we would see snow in the desert. So, you do see snow in the desert. It just doesn't happen very often, and it's not very much. So, Morel says, I know it snowed in Israel a couple years ago. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it happens. It happens. So, anyway, I think that's going to be the last question of the night. We're calling it early today. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. We appreciate your support. First of all, I want to thank our super chatters who really help us to keep the lights on and to support this ministry. We very, very much appreciate it. We want to thank our Patreon supporters who have helped us to, again, keep the lights on, keep the equipment upgraded, and to basically help us to do this from a day-to-day basis. We also want to thank our regular subscribers and who have been, who watch our videos, who comment, who like, and who basically share our videos with other people, because that gets the message out. So we want to wish you all a really, really great night. I hope you join us next week. And if you haven't hit like and subscribe, please do so. And so you don't miss any of our great content. Yeah. And tell your friends also. So, because we're really close to 10,000 subscribers, and hopefully next week we'll celebrate our 10,000th subscriber. And we appreciate all of you who have joined us tonight. I want to thank you very much for joining us. You have a great night, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.